Good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm based in Cardiff, but I've got very strong links with Merseyside. My dad's a Liverpool Welsh. Used to go to the Welsh non-conformist youth club in Aberystwyth when that was a thing. Anyway, I've got some data. I work obviously on Wales, but also I've got a book coming out on Englishness just in a few weeks' time, and I just want to talk generally about what Brexit means in the context of devolution and what's happening across the UK. And I want to make 4 points, and I'll make those very quickly, and then I'll try to say as much as I can in the time I have available. First of all, the Brexit vote revealed and further exacerbated deep fissures across all of the UK based on national identity. So what we know, if we didn't know before, is that national identity politics is everywhere, including in England itself. Second point is that Brexit supporters at the state's core always knew that their desired outcome would threaten the union, but are willing in theory to pay the price, and also have consistently chosen to implement Brexit in the ways that are most undermining of the union. And what this kind of underlines is that this is a union with remarkably few without qualification unionists, as I'm going to call them. And the third point is that we're now in a situation in which, again, the UK government is breaking up an established union order with no idea about what to put in its place, and is taking advice from people who don't either. So we're going from kind of the voodoo economics of Brexit to voodoo constitutional politics. And also, as it does Brexit, the UK government is deliberately undermining the middle position of devolution. And it's pushing the electorates in Scotland and in Wales either towards exit or assimilation. But I also think that what's equally possible is some kind of long-term toxic stasis in terms of the territorial politics of the state. Now, if you're not aware of the literature on this, we have shown that there are very, very strong, statistically very robust relationships between national identity and Brexit voting in Scotland, England, and in Wales. We don't have Northern Ireland data, unfortunately. I'm not going to go through this because you're going to lose interest, I'm sure. But I'll just show you England, because I think people are used to thinking that there might be some kind of nationality politics going on in Wales and in Scotland. But look at this in terms of England. So what we have here is British election survey data. So this is the Rolls Royce of data. And what we've done is asked people who respond to the British election survey in England what their sense of national identity is, and then to rate themselves on a scale of 0 to 7, 7 being very strong and 0 being nothing at all. And it turns out that most people have a very strong sense of identity, national identity of some kind. So 6 or 7 on that scale. And in England, almost 80% of the population are either strongly British and strongly English only, that's the second largest group, or strongly British only. Okay, and that's 4 in every 5. And we can talk about who the rest are if you want. But this is how they then voted. This is the leave votes of each of those groups. Okay, and this is data from immediately at the time of the referendum. And what we see is the two polls is we've got English identity, overwhelmingly, if you're strongly English only, voting for Brexit. If, however, you're strongly British only, you tended to vote Remain. Okay, but the key thing here is this jump between the strongly British only and the strongly British and strongly English. And what this shows, without spending too much time on it, is that once English identity is part of the makeup, you're much, much more likely to be a Brexit supporter. And that relationship is robust. Whatever else, I'm not going to show you the statistical models, whatever else you throw into the model, age, where you live, economic, anything, party identity, that is robust, whatever else is in the model. So there is a very strong relationship between English identity in England and supporting Brexit. British identity on its own in England means something different. I'll show you very briefly some Scottish data, because Scotland has been Wales is the most complicated. I can do that later if you want. In terms of the overall demographics in Scotland, I'm going to bring in English, British, because we do have around 7-8% of the Scottish electorate born in England, Scottish identity, British, and then combinations thereof. Now, there's almost nobody who's strongly English and strongly Scottish. There's almost nobody who's strongly Scottish, strongly English, strongly British. There aren't many of the strongly English only, but I'm keeping them in so you can see the contrast with England. Overwhelmingly, the largest group is the strongly Scottish only. This is how these groups voted leave, okay? Again, this is data from basically the day after the referendum in 2016. The two polls here, strongly Scottish only voted overwhelmingly to remain. Not all, but overwhelmingly to remain. On the other end of the spectrum, English identifiers in Scotland are still the most Eurosceptic, but note that English Euroscepticism is muted in Scotland, and we can speculate as to why, okay? Is it because of a kind of socialization effect of living in a society which is just less Eurosceptic? Is it because the media is different? Whatever, we can speculate. The interesting thing is here, it's the jump between those with Scottish and British identity to those with, Scottish only identity to those with Scottish and British identity. Basically, the story of this, and it's also true in Wales, is that when basically the same attitudes that associate with Englishness in England associate with Britishness in Scotland and in Wales. And if we had Northern Irish data, I suspect the same would also be true in Northern Ireland, but we don't have the data, so that's me just speculating. So Britishness means different things in different parts of Britain. And also we see that Englishness and indeed Welshness, because Wales is actually quite similar in terms of the percentage of Welsh-only people who voted Remain. These, I'm not going to talk through the Welsh figures, but they're there for you. Basically, Welshness and Scottishness work in the opposite way of Englishness, and then Britishness varies between England and Scotland and Wales. Okay, that's a lot to take in. I hope that I hope it makes some kind of sense. Very briefly, because I know I'm probably boring you and running out of time. The thing about Brexit is that it was always going to be difficult to accommodate Brexit and devolution in the same state, because, you know, Brexit is the reassertion of Westminster sovereignty, and that really runs against the grain of devolution. It was always going to be difficult, and Brexiters knew that. If you read, we are all aware that Boris Johnson wrote 2 articles deciding if he would campaign for Remain or leave. If you read the Remain one, he says it's going to be a problem with Scotland. Well, yeah, no kidding. We also know from the data that I've been collecting with colleagues up in Edinburgh University, up in Ian's part of the world, that overwhelming majorities of Conservative voting Leave supporters in England and Wales tell us that a second Scottish Indie Ref vote and a yes vote, and a border poll and Irish unity would be a price worth paying for Brexit. It's obviously the case that the eventual agreement with the EU has created some kind of economic border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. I won't talk about that because we'll hear more about that in a moment. It's also absolutely the case that the devolved governments in Scotland and in Wales were ignored in the negotiations around Brexit, and that the Internal Market Act undermines devolved competences in ways that were not necessary for the coherence of the legislation, i.e. the UK government is using the opportunity of Brexit to curtail devolved powers in Wales and in Scotland. What's really striking about this, and this is my last slide and I'm almost there, the UK government is currently undermining the current model of devolution with no clarity at all about what it wants to put in its place. And you may say this is very familiar given what's happened with Brexit. the policies that it's implementing on Brexit, on devolution, are basically a series of cliches. One is no more devolve and forget. There's a row of these cliches. What they all do is lead to constitutional incoherence and instability. You might think that creating policy based on cliches is quite familiar from the last few years. Meanwhile, and I say this knowing that I'm going to get pelters from at least two other speakers this evening, we have a main opposition party that continues to be in denial about nationality politics, especially with regard to England. So we've got talk about federalism, which I've got a big book coming out in a month with Ailsa Henderson from Edinburgh on Englishness. Basically, you struggle to find any kind of support in England for regionalism in any serious way. So what does this mean? It's not clear if I know there will be different views in this group about independence or Irish unity. It's not clear if any of this is achievable. There's also no democratic routes to abolishing devolution. So what we have is potentially a long-term, quite toxic situation. And I point to Catalonia, where we have this morally catastrophic, I think, situation where elected politicians are being jailed, have been jailed, or are in jail for trying to implement the mandate they were elected on. And my worry is that we end up, if you like, the long-term legacy of Brexit for the UK is this kind of toxic territorial politics from which there is no obvious escape. And I will stop there, having hopefully provoked all of you. Thank you.